Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to your Monday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. It was a busy weekend and already a busy Monday in the NBA, so we got plenty to talk about. Plus, I got your questions to answer, so I'll make sure I do that as well. But let's start off with what happened. Obviously, the draft is done, but the Pelicans have continued to make some moves. First, you had the release of Elfrid Payton and Brandon Boston Jr. When you look at that, these are clearly money-saving moves for the Pelicans as they continue to fill out their roster. For Brandon Boston, I think this is the bigger loss, I guess I would say, potentially, because Brandon Boston had some really good moments last season and seemed like someone that the Pelicans liked having around, a guy who could defend pretty well, who could shoot the basketball and score off the dribble. Had some struggles as far as like when he was forced into running the point guard position, but that was never his spot. He's a guy who's ideally suited as the 2 or the 3, depending on the size of the lineup you put him in. And I think that the Pelicans really end up losing a potential guy who could have grown as a scorer by letting Brandon Boston go. The release of Elfrid Payton is less of a concern for me because of Elfrid's limitations. Certainly the Pelicans could keep him around as a coach or something like that for him to help teach people. But when you look at his on-court production, particularly over the last 5 years, remember he was out of the NBA for a big chunk, but his last 5 years on the court, you saw increasingly bad seasons for Elfrid Payton overall. He is incredible at one thing. He can pass the basketball as few people can in the NBA. Elfrid Payton has great vision and timing when it comes to passing and anticipation. Fantastic there. But every other part of his game is too much of a net negative to keep him on the floor for extended amounts of time. He does not defend well at the point of attack. He does not score the basketball. Not only is he an unwilling scorer, he's an incapable scorer, shooting below 30% from three-point range last season, below 25%, I believe, from three-point range. So Elfrid just didn't have a place, not on a team that now has Jordan Poole, DeJounte Murray, and Jeremiah Fears to play the point guard position, and Jose Alvarado. So you've got 4 players who you could potentially have at the point guard this season. There's just no room on that roster for Elfrid Payton, even in the short term. And I think that there are upgrades if the Pelicans decide to utilize their free agent dollars on a point guard. There are upgrades over Elfrid Payton who could be available, particularly veterans who could come in and do a better job than I think he did. Again, no slight to Elfrid. Guy came off the street essentially and contributed to the Pelicans as best he could, had some 20 assist games, and just did everything that he could to kind of make the Pelicans competitive. But there are just, I think, better options overall out there on the market compared to Elfrid Payton. The Pelicans have signed a couple of players, a couple of rookies to deals. They signed Hunter Dickinson, the center out of Kansas, to a 2-way contract, 7'2" center, started his career at Michigan, finished it at Kansas, 2-time All-America, 2-time all Big 12 selection. Last season with Kansas averaged 17 points and over 10 rebounds per game. The good things about Hunter Dickinson come primarily on the offensive end. Can score the basketball, good footwork in the post, solid passer, nice touch around the basket, able to finish with primarily his right hand, not great with his left hand. But he does the little things offensively like screen and can rebound on the offensive level. Those are skills that should translate. He should be fine doing those on the next level. He is not a starting caliber center based on the projections he was somebody that was either going to be a mid to late second rounder or where he is an undrafted free agent picked up by the Pelicans. Not a consistent outside shooter, took some shots at times, but not really great at shooting from the 3-point range. And he's a little bit older at 24 years old. So you start thinking about what is his upside. The good thing is possibly that it typically takes centers a little bit longer to develop, to find their way. You would hope at 24 years old that this is a young man who has gotten his awkwardness and at least is solidified in what his game is and understanding it at this stage. So there's less of a curve coming into the NBA and understanding what your role potentially could be. But his upside based on his age, because that's what you compare people to, is the players their age. At 24, he's a little bit behind the curve. Not super athletic as a big, not super mobile, not a great leaper. And defensively, he could get picked on if you're putting him in pick and roll coverages, or he has to switch out to players on the perimeter. He can do some things defensively, but he is not going to move really well side to side or defend in space. The other pick that the other player the Pelicans signed is Chase Hunter. Chase Hunter played at Clemson last year. The Clemson Tigers were a very good basketball team, one of the few teams to beat Duke last year. He signs an Exhibit 10 contract, which is a non-guaranteed minimum salary contract, which allows him to go to training camp and potentially could be the pathway to a two-way deal for him. His strengths, getting to the basket, good at playing either guard position, the point or the shooting guard position, 6'4", 204. So he's already got an NBA body. Again, an older player, played 6 seasons of college basketball. So older with a limited ceiling, you would say. But he did post his best numbers of his career last season with Clemson. Career highs in scoring at about 17 per game, shot 47% from the floor, 3 rebounds, 1.4 steals per game for that Clemson team that went 27-7 and 18-2 in conference play. All right, as you can see, the Pelicans are starting to fill out their roster there with these undrafted rookies. So let's get into the questions. So I divided these questions into areas that they fell in. So I'm going to answer these in those groups, and some of them I consolidated based on just the similarity of these questions. So what's the Pelicans' biggest need outside of a starting center? They need more defense and shooting. I think those are the biggest things you need right now, because you look at this team, you would say you only have really 1+ defender in Herb Jones. You look at the rest of this roster, you have a lot of young players, which are typically not good defenders as they come into the league. You still don't have a tremendous amount of height in your starting rotation. So you need to be able to defend. You need to be able to shoot. You look at the shooters right now, you'd say Jordan Poole, Trey Murphy III. I don't know why I said junior. Trey Murphy III. And, you're counting on Antonio Reeves to be better. You're counting on Jordan Hawkins to be better. You're counting on Jose Alvarado to continue to shoot at a higher level. So, the Pelicans could still use some shooting. You're hoping for Sadiq Bey to give you what he gave you before the injury. There's a lot of hope, again, on the Pelicans front when it comes to shooting. So I think shooting, defense are your biggest needs outside of finding some depth at the center position. What do I think that they're going to do about center? They lost an option today as Day'Ron Sharpe re-signed with the Brooklyn Nets on what I would think is a below market deal, basically 2 years for $12 million. But I think there are options out there. When you look at a guy like, you go to Golden State and you can get a Kevon Looney potentially, who gives you at 29 years old, getting close to 30, gives you consistent production. He's a very solid rebounder to this day. You look at the numbers defensively when he's on the floor. The Warriors are at their best when he and Draymond were playing together defensively. And you look at throughout his career, this is a guy who's played for multiple championship teams in Golden State. He has consistently been a very high net rating player, no matter what lineups he's been. So he does his job extremely well. You talk about screening, he can do that. You talk about understanding defensive coverages, he can do that. You talk about rebounding, he's going to give you consistent rebounding. And I think the important thing for the Pelicans is not to necessarily find their starting center of the next 5 years. You just need somebody for the next 2 years while you try to find out what do you have in Yves Missi and what do you have in Derek Queen. If Queen can hold down the center spot, if Missi is going to grow into that position. So I think that if you get a player like a Kevon Looney, because I think your other options are starting to dwindle. You don't really have the kind of trade assets to get a Nick Claxton or somebody like that, or a Jared Allen. I don't think the Pelicans have those assets unless they're willing to give up a starter level player, which would mean most likely Herb Jones. Again, when you get to these scenarios of who you can get rid of to get more talent into the building, the biggest options you have are Zion Williamson, who the Pelicans continue to say that they're not ready to trade, that they want to build around. You have Trey Murphy, who, again, if you're building around Zion Williamson, you're not letting go of Trey Murphy in the immediate future. And then you have Herb Jones. You don't really have much else, because DeJounte Murray, no matter what, is going to cost money to to get him off the or money or picks, and the Pelicans would have to give up probably another first rounder, whether it's in 2028, 2030, or 2032. They'd have to give up a first rounder in order to move DeJounte Murray. So Herb Jones and his deal are the most likely to be traded if the Pelicans decide to make a bigger move. They could also sign a free agent like a Chris Boucher. He would be interesting. If you want to go shooting, who's a guy's a little bit smaller, is Jake LaRavia at 6'8", who is not necessarily a power player, but gives you a lot of shooting as a forward, and on the perimeter can do some things. It's a tough position to be in because I really think that they likely should have addressed this in the draft, but they're counting on their draft picks to perform well sooner rather than later. That has to be the implication when you've taken 2 rookies in the top 13. You are saying that you are the future of the franchise in a lot of ways. So I think the Pelicans have to commit in some ways to their rookies. And so if you're looking at the long term, Herb Jones could be the asset to move. And when you look now at Herb's financial value, Herb Jones this year is eligible for a 3-year contract extension worth about $67.8 million. Next summer, he'd be eligible for a 4-year extension worth $93.4 million. The maximum salary that he can get in the first year of that deal is $20.9 million, no matter which extension he signs, which represents somewhere in the neighborhood of 11% of the cap. If the Pelicans feel like $21 million is ultimately too much to pay for Herb Jones, and I think even if they offered a deal to Herb Jones today, he's not taking the 3-year deal. Herb is looking for that 4-year deal. He also has to assume that his value remains high. Certainly he wants to prove that he's back from his injury to not just the Pelicans, but to the rest of the NBA for those teams that could be interested in him. So if you're Herb Jones, you more likely are betting on that 4-year extension to get $20.9 million. Can the Pelicans afford that? That becomes the question. No matter how much you like Herb Jones, I'm asking the question. I'm not answering it today, but I'm asking the question. Is $21 million a fair price for the Pelicans to pay for Herb Jones, particularly if this year doesn't go the way that they would like? If you end up with a 35-win team, does Herb Jones at $21 million make sense for the New Orleans Pelicans? I can't answer that today, because there are always other moves that could be made and things that could change that dynamic. But I'm asking you, the fans, and you could put that below. Do you think Herb Jones at $21 million is a good value for 4 more years after his current contract is done? If it is, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you on that. If it isn't, I just want to know. I just want to know where fans sit on this. Is there still room to address the spacing issues around Zion, and why is it taking 6 years to fix? What's the path forward? Well, yeah, there's always time to address it, but how do you address it is the question. I think in the short term, the Pelicans are counting on development from the players that they have around them to increase the spacing. But I think you still have to address that. You're hoping that Karlo Makovic continues to develop and give you spacing as a 4/5, primarily a 4. You're hoping, again, that Sadiq Bey comes back to form and can shoot the way he is expected to shoot. You're hoping Antonio Reeves can shoot above 37% as he did as a rookie. You're hoping that Jordan Hawkins finds his shooting stroke if you don't move him this offseason. You're hoping, again, that Herb Jones can get back to the level that he did prior to his injury the year before, when he was flirting with 50, 40, 90. You can improve the spacing that way, but you can also improve spacing through your offensive philosophy and how players move. If the Pelicans are continuing to be the kind of offensive team that stands around, that doesn't move off ball, that doesn't create situations where the defense is in a trail chasing offensive players like Jordan Poole, like Trey Murphy, if you're constantly allowing the defense to see exactly where your offensive players are, if they can just stand in their positions and be able to go ball and man really easily and not have to chase, not have to move, not have to fight through any screens, not have to deal with cuts and all those things. If the Pelicans are going to continue to play defense that way, then the spacing is not going to improve. Offense that way, then the spacing isn't going to improve. It's going to take Willie Green figuring out something on the offensive end, because it doesn't matter. Even if you have good players, there's going to be nights when they're not hitting shots. So how do you create spacing? If you're not doing that through your offensive schemes, then you don't really have a chance. One of the things about the Warriors, and I think when we look at that team, we say their spacing comes from their willingness to shoot. I would say that it comes from the way that they move the basketball. The one thing about the Warriors is no matter who's on the floor, whether it's great shooting or subpar shooting, they're going to continue to move the basketball. They're going to continue to relocate players during their 24 seconds to make the defense deal with something. And you're looking for that 1 second or one fraction of a second when you catch the defense out of position so that you can get off clean looks or you can create driving lanes. The Pelicans have to do a better job at that. What bargain moves could the Pelicans make? What should they consider in trades or free agent if they're not giving up future assets? So you're looking at affordable upgrades. Again, I think it's on the free agent market. It's guys like Jake LaRavia. It's guys like Chris Boucher. It's guys like, the center options that you have, maybe a Luke Cornett if you're not, if his price is not going to spike too much. You have this $14 million trade exception that is available to you. The Pelicans need to slot that in, but you also look at this roster, and it's pretty full. You don't have a lot of roster spots to give away at this stage unless you continue to move players. And who is moving, again, is my question, because if you're moving one of the small guys on the bench, you're not getting a starter in return. If you're moving one of those guys, it has to be in conjunction with somebody else. So who are you sending out? That is the Pelicans' problem at this phase. Not that they don't have talent on the roster, but who could you ship out if you're trying to acquire more? You can do a couple of these smaller free agent moves and hope that they work. And I think that there are ways that you can if you pick up a veteran center who can at least hold the spot down for 15 to 20 minutes a night while you allow Yves Missi, while you allow Derek Queen to take minutes at center, maybe even Zion Williamson, again, playing some small ball center for the Pelicans. But I don't think there are a ton of options available to a team that doesn't have the roster spots available. All right. If you could add any one player in the league realistically within budget, who would you choose to legitimize the roster and why? To me, again, I would say Kevon Looney, because I think the main thing that this team needs is consistency. Availability, and consistency. So if I'm taking on a veteran in my price range, again, that's the big caveat here, is in my price range. Give me somebody who started in the NBA. Give me somebody who's used to platooning at that position, because there isn't a center available to the Pelicans, I would say, at this stage, who is going to play 30 plus minutes a night. So if you're the Pelicans, you need a dependable center who's going to play 70 plus games. You need somebody who's going to give you the requisite amount of physicality on both ends of the floor, and somebody who you don't have to teach, because there's going to be a lot of teaching that is required by this coaching staff this season with so many young players. You can't afford to be teaching another one of your bigs because there's still so much growth that has to happen. Derek Queen needs attention. Carlo Makovich needs attention. Missi needs attention, in order to grow and develop. You can't have another person in that rotation, already a rotation that is full of young players. You can't add more youth to that mix. You need a veteran. I'm not saying somebody who's old and washed up. I'm saying consistent veteran who can come in and produce on a nightly basis, and you know exactly what you're getting. Somebody who raises your floor and provides that consistency. Number 4, if you could add we just did that. Number 5, would a Brook Lopez sign a trade involving Herb, DeJounte, and salary filler make sense? It looks like the Bucks are really trying to run this back and give Giannis a team that can compete. If you're the Pelicans, you better hope so. Like, you need the Bucks to be competitive. So I don't think that the Bucks would do a Brook Lopez sign and trade with the Pelicans at this phase, because they don't want to take on that DeJounte Murray contract. They already have basically a player on contract that cannot play in Damian Lillard. So you're not really wanting to tie up almost over $100 million in 2 players who may not play this season. And I'm like, if you're Milwaukee, that doesn't help you. And plus, if you're the Pelicans, you need the Bucks to be good. You need the Bucks to be good. And you need to be good. Like, quite frankly, especially after the Derek Queen trade, you are in a position where you must qualify for the playoffs, and you really hope that the Bucks do as well. How does that draft trade affect the value of the unprotected pick? Remember, the unprotected pick is basically 2 first-round picks now for Atlanta. They get 2 swings at this because you get the better pick of either New Orleans or Milwaukee. So the Pelicans don't have a first-round pick next year in that regard. And that's the problem. A lot of fans feel like the media is being negative over Derek Queen. Nobody is questioning Derek Queen's ability. What you're questioning is value, because essentially the Pelicans utilized 3 first-round picks for Derek Queen. I'll give you this analogy. And people will ask, and I'll get into this in a second, but, there are people saying, what would Derek Queen's rookie year have to look like in order to make the trade worth it? There's no way you can go just off the rookie year. It has to be his career, obviously. But for his career, he'd have to be an all-NBA player to justify 3 first-round picks, essentially. I think Derek has the better opportunity of the 2 rookies to get on the court earlier and start proving his value. He feels more of a need immediately for the Pelicans as far as size and post scoring, 2 things that they just have not had recently. So I think Derek Queen fulfills more of a need. He can also create with the ball in his hands. Rookie point guards just don't do well in this league. It's just really hard. I've said time and time again that point guard is the toughest position to adjust to from college to the NBA, and I still believe that. So it's a real difficult process to put Jeremiah Fears if you're not going to just hand him the ball and let him fail, which is typically what you do with good young rookie point guards. You just give them the basketball and let them make their mistakes. You let them run the team. This is your squad. You can't really hand the reins to Jeremiah Fears in that regard yet. You just can't do that. So I think that you're looking for Derek Queen's rookie value to be somewhere he's got to put up double figures, closer to 15 points a game. He's got to give you 7 rebounds in that range, and he's got to give you 2 to 3 assists on a nightly basis without turning it over a lot. That's going to be the question, is does he turn it over in the NBA? He has to be efficient with the basketball. He's going to have to start expanding his perimeter, but that's not the worry, I guess, in year 1. I'm not as concerned about his outside shooting in year 1 or even year 2. I think it's important that he establish himself as a low post presence and a mid post presence. Somebody who can knock down the 15-footer off of pick and roll, who can also finish at the rim in either the dunker spot or as the primary low post scorer. He's got to do those things. In year 1, I think the biggest thing is for him to be available, to play a lot of games, and to put up some consistent, as best he can, numbers. There's going to be big lulls for any rookie. But to ask for more than 14 or 15 a game, like you're asking for like Zion Williamson level production, and I don't think that that's fair to Derek Queen, and I don't think that's what this team needs from him at this level. I got a question 2 of looking back. If I were the GM on draft night, who would I have picked at 7 and 23? I think y'all already know that. I would have taken Malawach at 7 and Nick Clifford at 23. I think you solve your post defensive problems. I think you get a potential all NBA defender, and I think his offensive game is going to improve. I think Phoenix got a great pick in taking Malawach. That takes nothing away from Jeremiah Fears. I'm fine with the Jeremiah Fears pick. I think his upside is worth it. I think at 7, he was a good value. He wasn't going to go below 7. He went at 7. I'm fine with Jeremiah Fears. I just would have taken Common Malawach at 7. Need Clifford at 23 because, again, no need to be redundant in taking 2 bigs. Clifford was available at 23. You've seen the Pelicans in Micah Peavy and the new signee that they got from Clemson and Chase Hunter. You see that they're looking for these 6'4" kind of guards who can do a little bit of everything defensively and give you multiple positions offensively. Nick Clifford could have done that, playing the 2 or potentially the 3 spot at 6'6", a very strong rebounder and a very good shooter his last couple of years in college basketball. Can NBA coaching help Jeremiah Fears improve his shooting from 3? It has to, but mostly that work is going to be done by Jeremiah Fears. This is just him getting in the gym and taking as many shots as he can. Realistic shots, game shots, catch and shoot. He's got to be ready to take those. That's the number one thing for him to work on, is those catch and shoot opportunities. And then to work on those corner threes. Those are the things you want to work on, catch and shoot in the corner. If you can be effective from those 2 spots as a rookie, I think that would be really good for him. Absolutely. The form is there. He shot better than 80% from the free throw line. That's usually indicative of whether or not you can ultimately become a good outside shooter. So I think the things are there for Fears. It's just the tough part is you're moving back further, obviously from the college line, about 3 feet. But these kids are shooting so far from behind the line. I don't know how much that matters, but that is a difference as far as spacing goes and where you're going to take these shots. And then the other part is just repetition. the Pelicans are certainly going to get him in the gym. And quite frankly, he's going to have more time because he's not going to be asked to be the starter. He's not going to be asked to carry the offense. So he's going to have more time to work on his game. He's not going to be running with the first unit a lot in practice. He will have the opportunity to get better as a shooter and gain more consistency. I think absolutely coaching will help improve, but nothing is going to help more than time and practice. Finally, what's your ideal development player for the rookie? Should any spend time in the G League, and who would be on the Summer League roster? I think the Summer League roster is going to be stacked, obviously, with your draft picks, including Chase Hunter and Hunter Dickinson. Both of those guys will be on there, so that gives you 5 right there. I think obviously Antonio Reeves makes 6. I think you're trying to get no more than 10, I would think, on the Summer League roster to get minutes. So that's 6. Then you're talking about Carlo again. That's 7. I don't think Eve will be there. I think Hawkins should go, though he won't. That would be 8. And then you're also looking at who else from last year? I think that then you've got your guys Quinones, who could potentially be going again. So, I mean, you have players who will be there in the Summer League. If we're talking about who's going to spend time in the G League, I think that the most likely candidate is Fears, because, again, we've seen Hawkins go down to the G League. We've seen Trey Murphy go down to the G League. We've seen these guys who just couldn't get minutes early on, the kind of minutes that they needed, go to the G League for a couple of weeks, whatever, get their game reps up, build their confidence as well in scoring against folks at that level, that in between of college and the NBA, and get you some confidence as well, because you're not getting the opportunity every day to get the kind of on-court minutes that allow you to develop at a high level. So I think Fears is likely to go down to Birmingham at some point, and outside of the two-way guys who already, will spend time in Birmingham. I think Fears is the guy from this class who most likely ends up, and I would say probably Micah as well. You would think that he goes down because he's a duplicate in some ways of what the role you already have for Herb Jones. So you want him to play down in Birmingham as well in the G League in order to get shot attempts up. It's going to be really important for these guys to get those shots and to be primary options, because that makes them better secondary options when they get back to the Pelicans. All right, finally, before we wrap up today, we're going to look at outlook and expectations. And this is a good question to end on. What's the realistic floor and ceiling for the Pelicans offenses and defense as currently constructed? I think the floor for the Pelicans defense is still bottom 5 defensively. If things go bad, if you don't have enough defenders at the point of attack, this can be a really bad defense. It was a bottom 5 defense last year. Certainly Herb Jones makes it better. Certainly Trey Murphy makes it better. If you get a consistent Zion Williamson, it makes it better. So if the ceiling for this, if the floor for this defense is the bottom 5 in the league where they were last year, then the ceiling for this defense is middle of the pack. I don't know if that's good enough to make this team a playoff team, but if everybody does what they're supposed to do, I think this is a middle of the pack defense. Offensively, you got more of an opportunity. They can't be any worse than they were last year offensively. Again, they were one of the 3 worst offensive teams in the league and couldn't do a lot of things just by being healthy, which is always the biggest question with this team. Offensively, they are much better. If they can be a middle to, high teens offense, they give themselves a chance every night. But both of those groups, the offense and the defense, have to find some consistency in order for this team to really meet the expectations that you have for it. Because ultimately, I think the fans and I think the front office believe that this is a playoff team. I think it finishes somewhere between 6 and 12 because that's how jammed the Western Conference is right now. It could finish as high as 6 depending on what happens with injuries and trades around the Western Conference. It could finish as low as 12th because I don't think the Pelicans are the worst team in the Western Conference. I don't think that they again, healthy, I think they have more high-end talent than some of the teams at the bottom of the West. So I think I think it's, again, Western Conference year in and year out, the cut between the top 6, that 7 through 10, and then that 10 through 14 is not going to be that steep. It's not going to be that deep of a cut to separate those teams. So I think the best case scenario is the Pelicans have a decent offense, a competitive defense, and finish somewhere around 500. Like, this is not a 45. This is not a 50-win team. Best case scenario, I think, is if they finish around 42 wins. for them to come off what they came, the injuries that they had last year, the changes that they have on this roster, the amount of youth. And I think that that's a big caveat too, is when you look at the amount of youth, how many teams that are going deep into the playoffs are doing that with 5 first-year and second-year players in their top 10 of their rotation. You are relying heavily on young players to figure this out pretty quickly, and you're relying on players who have not shown the ability to stay healthy to do so. So those are the big question marks for the Pelicans, but I think a realistic floor for this team is somewhere above 30 to 35 wins, and I think the ceiling is no more than 45. If they exceeded expectations, I think that the ceiling is somewhere around 45 wins, which in the Western Conference, I think would be, Pelicans fans would have to be very happy about that. But if you finish in 35 wins, I think that that's a reasonable floor too for this team. That you're chasing 500, but ultimately, if you finish with 35, it's a bigger loss because you're out of the playoffs. You wonder about, like, the big question for me, the one that hangs over all this, and I think it's the same for most fans, is the Willie Green question. Because if Willie Green is the coach to start this season, and I don't know how much confidence there is that he's the coach at the end of this season, certainly there's not a lot of confidence that he's the coach next season. Are you punting an entire year of development for your young players and potentially a year of competition for your veteran players by keeping Willie Green in place? That will tell the entire. There are two things that override this entire season: Zion Williamson's health and Willie Green's impact as the head coach. There has to be a sense of direction. There has to be a sense of purpose. There has to be a sense of offensive flow. There has to be a sense of defensive intensity. And the confidence in Willie Green establishing that is almost gone completely, if not completely eroded. The other part, I have no control over. Zion Williamson's health, we shall see. If Zion's healthy, the team wins. I don't know what level, but they win. When you have the guy who can be the best player on the court every night, you win more often than you don't. That's been the case throughout Zion's career. If he's healthy, this team will be good. I don't know how good, but they will be good. With Willie Green coaching, I don't know what the limitations that he brings to this. Willie has to completely rewrite his history and his reputation in one season in order for the fan base, and I think even his own team, to embrace him again and to put him in a level where they respect him enough to believe that he's the guy. But when you enter the season under these kind of circumstances, with your head coach being such a question mark, that hangs over the entire year, especially when your head coach does not have a proven track record of making this team better. And people can look at that record and say, yeah, they got better record-wise for 3 straight seasons. But when you look deeper into it, there was a lot of smoke and mirrors that allowed that to happen. Who they beat, who they couldn't beat, where they won, where they couldn't win. When you look at those things, there's a lot more holes in the cheese than there were when you just look at it from the front. All right, that's going to do it for this Monday. I'll be back again tomorrow, of course, with another show for you. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. Make sure you share this as well. I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate your thoughts. Go ahead and leave those below in the comments. And until the next time, this has been the Post Up with David Grubb on Boot Crew Media. Y'all have a good one.